Today I am going to be talking about the book, The Jewel Ornament of Liberation. And this version is by Trangu Rinpoche, and it's primarily his commentary on the text that Gampopa wrote. And I'm going to begin today with talking just a little bit about the biography of Gampopa. And the Gampopa he was born in 1079 and died in 1153. And he was a very, very popular teacher in Tibet. He had at one time over 50,000 students, which at a time a medieval society, this would be very remarkable just because of the fact that travel in Tibet was difficult, and yet his fame spread throughout the country, and people came from great distances to see him. And he also did what a lot of great teachers in Tibet did at that time, and that is that they would travel with their retinue um, from area to area and set up tent villages, you could say, where the nomads would come and set up their tents. A big tent would be set up to hold the teachings and pujas and so forth. And so anyway, he had a huge number of students for his time, and that he brought the teachings of the Kadampa tradition and the Kagyu tradition from Milarepa, Marpa, and so forth, and or the Mahamudra tradition of Milarepa and Marpa, and fused them or joined them into what is now the Karma Kagyu tradition. And Gampopa wrote two books to really shape this Kagyu tradition. From Marpa and Milarepa, he brought in the Mahamudra teachings and various Vajrayana deity practices. But Marpa and Milarepa were yogis, they were not monastics. And he brought in from the Kadampa tradition monasticism, and he also brought in a lot of Mahayana Buddhism. And there are two of his texts that are widely studied by the Kagyu tradition. The other one is, here is a book of Khenpo Karta Rinpoche's that is his commentary on the other book. This particular book is called The Instructions of Gampopa, a Precious Garland of the Supreme Path. So these two books are classic, and they really shaped the Kagyu lineage to the form that it is today. And to give you an idea of what the Kadampa teachings are about, and this is primarily Kadampa teachings, here is a brief look at the table of contents. And the Kadampas are responsible for the 7 points of mind training, by the way, if you're familiar with that, where there are all these slogans. So here in the table of contents, chapter 1, the 10 causes of loss. Chapter 2, the 10 necessary things. Chapter 3, the 10 things upon which we rely. Chapter 4, the 10 things to be abandoned. Chapter 5, the 10 things not to be abandoned, and so forth, till we get to chapter 28, which is the 10 things that are spontaneously present as great bliss. He does have some of these chapters being like the 14 useless things, the 18 hidden evils of practitioners, the 11 marks of a holy person, and so forth. So it's not just 10. But this gives you an idea of how codified the Kadampa tradition was, and it has been assimilated by all 4 major Tibetan traditions. And one of the marks is these lists. So Milarepa was Gampopa's main teacher in terms of the Mahamudra tradition. In the biography, it doesn't mention who his main teachers were in the Kadampa tradition, but the Kadampa tradition was brought by Atisha to Tibet roughly less than 100 years before Gampopa was studying with the Kadampa school. And I went over this biography last Tuesday. And so I'm just going to end with Milarepa's parting instructions to Gampopa after he basically gave everything that he knew to Gampopa. It said that for Milarepa, it was like pouring water into a glass, that Gampopa received everything that Milarepa gave him, and it became part of him. So his parting instructions to Gampopa was that he turned around and turned his back to Gampopa and shall we say, lowered his robes so that his rear end was visible, and it was full of calluses from him practicing on rocks in caves and so forth. And the point of this was that it takes hard work to attain fruition. And his final instructions to his students, Gampopa's instructions to his students were, quote, "If they meditate diligently, many will reach the path. To dispel obstacles, experience the teachings, and increase meditation practice, it is enough to follow the profound Guru Yoga, Mahamudra practice, and Tumo." Tumo is a practice that Khenpo Rinpoche taught in retreat, and his 3 students that are retreat masters at Karmeling, they too will teach Tumo, and it could be described as mystic heat, but it is a practice of a yogic practice where one develops inner heat, and this quickly leads to realization through this practice. So meditation is necessary to tame the mind, and Gampopa taught what is called the graded path. And here, reach the path means that we have to tame our mind before we can really train on the path. So we meditate so that we can reach the path, And then the graded path trains the mind. And the way we train the mind is through the 7 points of mind training, and also through practicing the 6 paramitas: generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, meditative concentration, and wisdom. In the biography, it says that Gampopa realized the nature of mind without any doubt, and his meditative concentration was so great that even when he was sleeping, he was experiencing realization. Ordinary sleep, there is a Tibetan phrase for it, which is the meditation of stupidity. Whereas Gampopa experienced the clear light of his mind when he was sleeping. He never, you might say, went back to experiencing ordinary mind. He had complete realization. And he manifested what would be called miraculous behavior, that sometimes he could manifest as a Buddha, as Chenrezi, that he could be at 2 or 3 places at the same time. And in the biography, it mentions that he knew the dreams of some of his students. And so there's this story about Geshe Gyalwa Chungsan Chen, who had a dream of stupas in caves and people prostrating to them. And Gampopa gave a very good explanation of this dream without the Geshe explaining what the dream was. And what the dream was is that these stupas were Gampopa's monastic, his monks, and that in the future they would be revered by students. And since in the dream some of the stupas were not finished, this meant that some of his monks had work to do, but they would too attain realization. Gampopa's main student in terms of the Kagyu lineage is the first Karmapa, by the way, but other students of his attained a very high level of realization. And in the Mahamudra lineage prayer, where they talk about the great and lesser Kagyu lineages, many of them derive from students of Gampopa or the students of Gampopa. Gampopa taught experience over intellect. And the Kagyus are still that way. And a good comparison is the Kagyu lineage versus the Gelupas. The Gelupas stress scholasticism, and the Gelupas are the Dalai Lama comes from the Gelupa lineage. And so you might say the Dalai Lama is the most recognizable member of the Gelupa lineage. But if we look at the difference of what it takes to be accepted to a 3-year retreat, at the retreat center Karmeling that Khenchen Thrangu Rinpoche started, I'm not sure what the qualifications are now, but when I did retreat, the qualification was completing Nundro. And then Rinpoche with his eye of wisdom, accepting you. And there was one man that attended the retreat that I did that had only been practicing Buddhism for maybe 2 years or perhaps less. Whereas in the Gelugpa tradition, you have to study for 13 years before you can apply for attending a 3-year Gelugpa retreat. So again, practice is really important in the Kagyu lineage. They are sometimes referred to as the practice lineage. And so since they are talking about experience over intellect, this does not mean, on the other hand, that you don't study at all or you don't attend teachings, but that it is really important to practice. He also said that reading what he has written in the future will be the same as meeting him and receiving teachings from him. So there are tremendous blessings that are present when we read and study Gampopa's writings. He died at the age of 75 in meditation posture. The biography says that he was absorbed in clear light and that there were lots of auspicious signs at the time of his death, such as rainbows, a rain of flowers, music in the sky, and so forth. So now I'm going to go on to the biography of Khenchen Thrangu Rinpoche. And it starts in the 15th century when the 7th Karmapa established Trangu Monastery and recognized a man by the name of Sherpa Gyaltsen as an emanation of one of Padmasambhava's main disciples that had attained what are called cities. These are there are super mundane cities, and then there is the ultimate city of attaining realization. And Padmasambhava had 25 main disciples that had attained a city of one type or another. And so the 7th Karmapa recognized this person, Sherpa Gyaltsen, as being one of these 25 very impressive and important students of Padmasambhava. And he enthroned him as the abbot of Trangu Monastery and gave him the title of the first Trangu Rinpoche. The present Trangu Rinpoche is the 9th in this lineage. And he was born in 1933 in Kham, which is eastern Tibet. He was recognized at the age of 4 by the 16th Karmapa and also by the previous Situ Rinpoche. And they recognized him an emanation or an incarnation of Trangu Rinpoche. And he was taken then to the Trangu Monastery and received the education of a tulku and did retreats. And what this means, the education of the tulku, it didn't go into this in great detail, but being recognized as the emanation of a great master means that you are usually educated more strictly. You're expected to catch on more quickly, and you're given more material to work with, and so on and so forth. And so these tulkus frequently catch on very quickly, and instead of having to relearn everything from the beginning. It's more like parts of their training are more of a reminder. I think that's a good word, a reminder of training that they have had in previous lives. And at 16, then the training became even more intensive, and he stayed in retreat to continue his education. At 23, he was given full ordination. And then at 27, he fled to India because of the Chinese invasion. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche was at Trangu Monastery, and he was already living in at Trangu Monastery as a monk when Trangu Rinpoche was brought there. And they became close at that time, and they stayed close right up until the time of Rinpoche's parinirvana. But in the retreat that I did, Trangu Rinpoche came and did all of our major empowerments, and Rinpoche participated. And it was wonderful to see the two of them. It was almost like twins to see them do a puja or an empowerment together. So at 35, Trangu Rinpoche was awarded the degree of Geshe La Rampa. And this is the highest academic degree of the Galupa lineage. So, and this took an examination with over 1,000 monks attending this. He was, by the 16th Karmapa, appointed the abbot of Rumtek Monastery, where the 16th Karmapa found home, went there after he fled Tibet. And he also was the administrator of the school that is at Rumtek. It's called the Shedra. It means basically an institution of higher academic study. And it is through this Shedra at Rumtek that Khenpos are created. And Khenpos have the highest degree in Buddhist studies in the Kagyu lineage. And so he helped, among other things, train Mingyur Rinpoche, Hunlap Rinpoche, and many others, Khenpo Tenkyong, and so on down the line. He also trained and taught the four, what are called the four heart sons of the 16th Karmapa. And this is Taisitu Rinpoche, Jamban Kantro Rinpoche. Now I'm having a bit of a senior moment. Gyaltsop Rinpoche, and then the Rinpoche that you might say is split off and recognized a different Karmapa. And he trained all of those. Fortunately, Trangu Rinpoche, while he is in poor health, he is still alive today. And we are very fortunate to be able to receive teachings from him through this book. And also, some of you, I'm sure, have met and received teachings from him in person. He is the abbot of Gampo Abbey in Nova Scotia, which was founded by Je Gampopa, and Trangu House in the UK, United Kingdom. In Kathmandu, there is both a monastery and a nunnery that he founded. And then finally, outside of the Kathmandu area in the mountains is Namo Buddha, which I have visited. And it's a very, very beautiful location and facility. And this too does a lot of educational work and other things. So this is a little bit about Trangu Rinpoche. Next comes the preface, and then we're going to get into the main text. But there was a lot here in these opening sections, and I wanted to cover them to make sure that you understood this. So Gampopa has condensed the teachings of the Buddha into one book. There are 108 volumes of the Buddha's teachings. He lived a very long time and gave a lot of teachings, and his teachings were addressed to a variety of students, and the teachings that he gave were what was appropriate for his students. And so when the Buddha first started teaching his students, you could say no one had any training in Buddhism because Buddhism did not exist, or the Buddha Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, did not exist. So first of all, he had to introduce the people that attended his teachings and students and so forth to the main ideas of the foundation path. And then as his students started to mature, he gave more profound teachings, and he gave teachings on emptiness, for instance, the Heart Sutra, and so on. And so what Gampopa did here is he condensed all of these teachings into one book. And as I said, he combined the teachings of Atisha, which formed the Kadampa lineage, with the Mahamudra teachings, which came from Milarepa. The book is, quote, terse and hard to follow, end quote. Trangu Rinpoche spent 4 months teaching on this book. And the editor noted that the first translation of this book by Gunther has some faults, among others being difficult to understand. So this book is not a word-for-word translation. This is Trangu Rinpoche's teachings on the words of Gampopa. And I chose this book because it's a little more accessible because of the commentary. It does leave out things, but there is still plenty in this book for us to study and learn from. So this is why I chose this book. Now, on page 1, we actually get to the words of Trangu Rinpoche. And he says that because of the suppression of Buddhism by the Tibetan king Long Dharma, the Buddha's teachings had declined in Tibet, that monasteries and nunneries had been destroyed, and Long Dharma wanted to go back to the Bon teachings that were there and were still present before Padmasambhava brought and firmly planted Tibetan Buddhism in Tibet, or Buddhism from India in Tibet. So they had declined, and in Trangu Rinpoche's word, some became lost, some, quote, slightly corrupted, and that this was a dark time for Buddhism. But two Tibetan kings invited Atisha, who died in 1054, to Tibet. And from Atisha, then this Kadampa tradition arose. The Nyingmas were present at this time, and they're still present, and a very vibrant lineage too today. But they had become diminished at this time. And so again, these Tibetan kings invited Atisha to revitalize the teachings. And the emphasis of the Kadampa teachings is proper conduct and meditation. Trangu Rinpoche says that he was asked specifically to teach on refuge, the aspiration to reach enlightenment, and the 6 paramitas. Milarepa taught on Mahamudra, and so Gampopa brought these two traditions together. Now, the next point that he talks about is the name of the text, which literally translates as Ornament of Precious Liberation. And here, liberation is from our suffering and from all our problems. And that the solution to all our problems and our suffering is to eliminate the causes of suffering. And when we eliminate the causes of suffering, then happiness, wisdom, peace, love, compassion all arise in our minds. So precious, or the Tibetan word is Rinpoche, here means like a wish-fulfilling tree. That this text leads to receiving everything that we have ever wanted, fulfilling all of our wishes, eliminating suffering and leading to full Buddhahood. Ornament means to clarify, like a jewel or like a mirror clarifies. And so the text can help us see this jewel of liberation, how we can achieve it, and what are the benefits. The beginning of the text has an homage to it, which is standard in Tibetan Buddhism. And because the homage is to Manjushri, this means that this text belongs to the Abhidharma. Manjushri represents the highest wisdom, prajna. He is the bodhisattva of wisdom. In fact, Manjushri holds in his right hand a sword that has an edge on both edges, and it has a sharp edge on both edges, and it represents cutting through duality. It cuts both ways, as opposed to a sword that has an edge on one side. So Manjushri is the bodhisattva that represents wisdom. He's described as being youthful because he is not a Buddha yet. Ultimately, he's a fully realized Buddha, but manifests as a bodhisattva. But that's why he is described as youthful. And then the homage also includes others, and this is a sign of humility. So there are 6 topics in the book. The first is the primary cause, which is Buddha nature. Everyone has it. All sentient beings possess this pure wisdom of the Buddha. The second topic is the right basis, and this is the correct foundation to work from. This is the right preparation to begin to travel the path to liberation, and particularly our precious human body. And of course, we'll get into this later. The third topic is the condition, and it is considered the contributory cause of liberation. And this is the Lama, the spiritual friend, the person that shows the path and guides us. And topic number 4 is the right means, and this is the instructions of the Lama. Topic 5 is right fruition. This is Buddhahood and the kayas, the bodies of the Buddha. Sometimes it is talked about the 3 kayas, others the 4 kayas, and sometimes the 5 kayas. We'll get into this later. And then the last one is right activity. And this is described as spontaneous, non-conceptual activity to benefit all sentient beings. So in the next part of the book, it's called Chapter 1, Buddha Nature. This starts on page 9 of my edition. The cause is the essence of the Buddhas. This is a quote from the original text. So without Buddha nature, which is the cause, there could be no fruition. With Buddha nature, fruition is possible. Therefore, it is the cause, the primary condition needed for liberation. He uses the example, and this is in the text, about churning milk to get butter. If you try churning water, you will not get butter because there is not this potential. And also pressing sesame seeds to get sesame oil. But if you press sand, you will never get oil from it, at least sesame oil. That both water and sand do not have this potential. But we have Buddha nature, and therefore we have this potential of fruition. But it takes great effort to experience this fruition. So, quote, with the essence, we have the seed for enlightenment. And so when we work on it in the right way, we will accomplish enlightenment, end quote. And I stressed in the right way. The question is, where does Padmasambhava fit into the timeline of Gampopa, the Kadampas, and so forth? And so Padmasambhava was brought to Tibet back in, I believe it was the 8th century AD. And he came, now this was a country that Buddhism had not been established before, and you had the Bon religion that was being practiced and followed at that time. And other teachers had come from India and had failed to establish Buddhism there. The country, you could say, was wild. in terms of both the Tibetans and this, you might say, the spirits. And so they brought Padmasambhava in, the king did, and among other things, he tamed a lot of hostile spirits and bound them by oath to become Dharma protectors. And this, there's a whole nother book we could study about this. But then this king Langdharma, he was the first king after Padmasambhava that sided with the Bon religion. And he tried to destroy monasteries, nunneries, wipe out Buddhism from Tibet. There are other examples of this in other religions. You know, you could say what went on in Europe after Martin Luther with the Catholics and the Protestants, yada, 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 isn't too different. Humans are humans. So anyway, in I believe it was the 11th century, then some Tibetan kings decided that they wanted to revitalize Buddhism. And so they invited Atisha, who came, and then he gave these teachings and established the Kadampa tradition, along with the already existing Nyingma tradition. And the Kadampa tradition became assimilated, so assimilated by the Nyingma tradition, and now the Kagyu is what we're talking here. There are two other traditions, which is the Galupa and then the Sakya tradition, and they too assimilated much of the Kadampa teachings. And this happened to such a point that the Kadampa disappeared as a separate lineage. And less than 100 years after Atisha gave these teachings in Tibet, brought them to Tibet, Gampopa then studied them. And his original training was as a Kadampa monk in a Kadampa monastery. He excelled, but then he sought Milarepa for a teacher. And then he absorbed, I think it was said, it was like pouring water into water, you know, became inseparable from the teachings that Milarepa gave him. And then as a result of that, his main student was the first Karmapa, but he had other main students that could be talked about that aren't talked about in the book. And so this is where the Kagyu lineage took its present form. The question is, what can you tell us about the Bon tradition? And quite honestly, I can only tell you a little bit. One of them is that it took on, I think, some of the teachings from Tibetan Buddhism. They might look at this a little differently and say it's the other way around. But be that as it may, Barter Tulku Rinpoche once stayed here, and I had a book. I still have it. I'd have to dig deep to find it, from the Bon tradition, that is written by a contemporary teacher, and it was on Dzogchen teachings. Barter Rinpoche understood the book enough. You know, he looked at it. He said, "These aren't Bon teachings. These are Dzogchen teachings." Again, they're different traditions, different lineages, but they basically, some of the lineages talk about, this path, and when you reach fruition, you're enlightened, and on and on and on, that are just amazingly parallel. And then there's some that are very different. I have heard that in some traditions, making live sacrifices of animals is practiced, for instance, which of course is totally against the Buddha Dharma. But really, this is about all that I know. And the lineages that are most like Tibetan Buddhism are accessible today. You can find teachers and so forth.